What did you learn about literally dying?
What I learned about dying. I learned
It's, by the way, not a question we ask everyone.
Yes.
That's our first question normally.
Yeah, that's a good. I mean, I had a near-death experience. I flatlined for 4.5 minutes, and I was on the other side. I had a come back to the light type experience, and what I learned from that was it made me believe in a lot of things I didn't believe before. It made me believe in the power of love. That's actually I now believe that's essentially like the fundamental substrate where all energy is connected. And I felt an experience of that on the other side where your ego dissolves, time dissolves, and you just feel like you're a drop in the ocean and the entire ocean. And that was good. That was good to feel that. That was very affirming I have a lot less fear of death now.
How did it happen?
I was born with my stomach twisted in a knot. I was supposed to die when I was born.
Oh.
And then the scar tissue from that surgery like freakishly broke off all these years later, and it created a bowel obstruction. And I didn't know it at the time. My stomach was just getting bigger and bigger and bigger. I looked like 3 months pregnant.
Over days or?
Yeah, over like 3 days. I went from like 3 months pregnant to 6 months pregnant to
God.
9. My stomach had always hurt throughout my life, so I just was like used to dealing with that. But then at some point I was like,
Oh.
this is very uncomfortable. So I called my friend who's a doctor and said, I'm throwing a party tonight. There's this girl coming I'm really excited about. Do I have to, do I have to do something about this? He's like, yeah, you should go to the hospital. So I went to the hospital. They did all these tests. They didn't know what was going on. They then, after a couple hours, said to my parents, and then our COO had also come because I was supposed to meet her. They said to my parents, and her name is Helen, like, you guys go home. We're going to keep him overnight. And if he's not better by the morning, then we'll do surgery then. So Helen drives home to her house, pulls into her driveway. It's midnight, and she's exhausted. She's been at the hospital all day, and she's going to get out of the car, and something tells her to go back to the hospital. And she's British and a COO and very serious. She's not like a Venice Beach, like listen to the cosmos type person. This was not normal for her, but the voice was undeniable. And she drove back, and if she hadn't driven back, I would have died like 45 minutes later.
Really? Why? Why about her driving back?
She came in, and my heart rate had plummeted, and the machines had not alerted the nurse. And so she came in, and her grandmother had been in the hospital, so she knew how to read the machines, and she saw that my blood pressure was dangerously low.
Oh, that's amazing.
Bloody hell.
Yeah. And so she went and got the nurse, and the nurse like, that can't be right. He wouldn't be getting oxygen to his brain. So they did another test, got the same results. They called in the doctor. She took one look and like called in a crash team and rushed me down into surgery. And then they came out of surgery, and they said to my mom, look, the good news is we figured out what's going on. It's a bowel obstruction. The bad news is his heart rate is continuing to plummet. We don't know why, and he's in critical condition. So a couple hours pass. My mom goes downstairs to get my dad and my brother, and she's coming back up the elevator, and she hears on the loudspeaker code blue in room 437. And my mom works in a hospital, so she knows that means flatline, and she knows that's my room. So she gets out of the elevator. She starts running out in the hall. She gets to the door, and the nurse says, I'm sorry, you can't come in. This is really serious. And she says, look, I was there when he came into this world. If he's leaving this world right now, I'm going to be in that room. So they let her in the room, and I'm flatlined on the table, and they're doing the
Paddles.
I can never remember that word. Paddle. Yeah, defibrillator. They're doing the defibrillator.
Well, you weren't conscious at the time, so yeah.
Yeah, it makes me sense. Yeah. And they're zapping me, and my body's bouncing up and down, but I'm not responding. I'm totally flatlined. And so my mom starts to crumble. It's one thing to lose a child. It's another thing if it's happening a foot in front of you. And at the same time, my brother was outside with my dad, and this doctor came out and said to another doctor in front of my brother, not knowing it was my brother, like, hey, we lost this guy. I think he's gone. And so my brother pushed my dad in the room, and my mom was faced this way towards me, and my dad kind of came in from her left, and he was crying so loudly because he thought I was gone, and that she turned around and said, Gary, you gotta quiet, or they're gonna kick us out of this room, And when she turned, she said she saw something that just like transformed her. She said all these people, these doctors, these nurses, these staff members had gravitated outside the window, and there was like 40 of them. She said they looked like this silent church choir just sending in positive energy. And she was so moved that these people that didn't even know her son were sending in love, that it was this like transformational experience for her. It just like filled her up with strength. And she took a deep breath and she turned back and she just started coaching me. She was like, Matthew David Pohlson, these people are fighting to save your life, but you are not fighting hard enough. You need to fight harder, Matthew David Pohlson. You need to fight to come back to us. And they said it was this really surreal experience to watch, because here's this, 65-year-old mom in an operating room. Like, that's never the case on like Grey's Anatomy or something. And the flatline went on for 4.5 minutes.
Wow.
And they don't usually fight that long. But because she was fighting, they kept fighting. And then at one point, she started thinking like, this has gone on too long, and like I'm gonna lose my son, and if I lose my son, my husband's probably gonna die of a broken heart. And as she went there, the main doctor kind of like shook his head as to say, this is like done. He started to like pull away, and she grabbed him by the arm. She said, please don't call it yet. And then he turned back and he said, wait a second. And they're all just watching the flatline machine like go along, waiting to see if it'll tick up. And then they said they saw something they'd never seen before in a hospital. Instead of it ticking up out of nowhere, I just popped up.
From the table?
Yeah. And opened my eyes. And like literally came up awake. And then all of a sudden I looked and I see all these people staring at me, the choir. I just see all these people I don't know looking at me. And then I finally like saw, and they're like, their faces were in shock. They were like, and then I saw my mom, and I just kind of like lifted my right arm and like went like that and gave a thumbs up.
And the doctor said that was the most extraordinary experience.
Well, then there was 2 more days of like crazy stuff where I was supposed to die for 2 more days. Like all this other stuff happened. Yeah.
Bloody hell.
That's amazing. Feels like, so I'm interested because you've obviously told the story before a handful of times, but you get goosebumps listening to it. Do you get emotional anymore telling it?
I do. I just got emotional there. I haven't told it for a while. It takes you back there. Like the heroism of my mom, like I didn't really, like everyone's like, oh, that must have been so hard. Like I didn't really go through it. Like I was, like she had to go through, my dad had to go through like the idea they were going to lose their son. And there was 2 more days of where I was going to die, and all this other crazy stuff happened. And I just think of like what, like you guys are parents, like what that must have felt like. And that's where I get emotional. And her courage, she summoned some kind of power that was like, she's like, I didn't have what I was able to do during that time. Like, I don't know where that strength came from. I didn't know I had it.
I think it's incredible. Thank you for sharing.
Yeah.
So you can totally, I guess, see, you're working in this sort of actually meaningful and purposeful space. But I guess what I'm hearing from you, I don't want to put these words in your mouth, like, let me know if this is right or not quite how it happened, but you are doing something purposeful and meaningful, but it doesn't necessarily feel completely like the most powerful and most natural way that you can amplify this cause.
Exactly. Yeah, I just realized like that we were never going to, like when I asked the doctor what his explanation for how they saved me, he's like, we were inspired by your mom. Like before the second surgery, she was grabbing the doctors by the cheeks, looking into their eyes, saying, this is my son, but today this is your son, and this is your brother, and their company's trying to do good, and you need to help them. He's like, so we were motivated by that, but outside of that, there are much larger forces at play. And I said, well, as a man of science, like, how do you define larger forces? And he said it was love, and it was optimism that saved you. So then, like after that, I was like, how do I put as much of that out in the world as possible? And it was clear that doing celebrities was never going to be truly world changing. We didn't control our supply. We could so there was a limit to like how big that was going to be, and
that also makes sense.
That was the moment.
And how long had you been, like, how old were you? Like, how long had you been doing the business?
I was 40 years old. I'd been doing the business for 6 years. And then after that, we changed and went from celebrities to now we do houses.
So you come out of that experience and you go back to the team, you go back to your investors and you say, guys, A, here's this crazy story. But B, I feel like there's a pivot here. I feel like there's something that we can do. We need to change our strategy. And this is why. And the reason is love. Were they not all like, dude, like, we know you're in a hospital in California, but please just fuck off. We've got venture capitalists here.
I've had VCs from California on my boards before. Like
they don't care about love.
We're changing because of love, guys.
Yeah, but what's the term of love?
Yeah, exactly.
What's the term of love?
Quite big.
It's quite big.
It's pretty big. It's
Yeah,
pretty big.
it worked out for Tinder.
Yeah.
And so you just spoke about the, I suppose, psychological change that you went through afterwards, in terms of, I feel it's coming across as if you feel lighter in life. You know, you feel more connected. And so how has that manifested itself in your life?
Yeah, I do feel like it took me a while to get there. I like almost was depressed for a while about it, because like you have all these people who are like, you know, you've been on the side, like what's the insight, or like, you know, you're here for a reason now, like, because there's this whole crazy story of how they saved me. And so, but after a while, I got to the point where I learned, and this sounds like, I can't say this without sounding cheesy, but I learned what it means to actually love yourself more. That was the first thing. I wasn't doing that before. I was like, you know, I was very ego driven, not in like I was never like an asshole. Am I allowed to say that on the show? Okay.
So what you want.
It's England.
Yeah, it's England. Yeah. I was never like
No holds barred.
I was always like a kind person, but I wasn't kind to myself. Like I would always really worry about what other people thought of me. I would compare myself to people all the time, and then just go into that loop of like, you're not enough. And I really did that.
And you're in LA, so that's a very difficult place to be.
Exactly. Yeah. And I just didn't really understand that. Like I didn't understand like what I was saying to myself. And then I actually did this thing called the Hoffman process, which is like, you guys know that? Yeah, where you go off the grid for 7 days, you know, of your phone and like books or any music, and it's a pretty intense process. And in that there was a moment where they said something like, do you ever hold grudges? And I said, no, I always forgive people. They're like, yeah, but do you ever hold grudges against yourself? And I was like, there's shit I have forgiven myself that I did like 10 years ago, you know? And that just like opened up a whole new thing. I'm like, God, I do not treat myself internally the way that I treat others. And that whole near-death experience triggered that. And then now as a result, I think I'm able to, I share love more. I spread love more. I send messages, like whenever I think of somebody, I'll like send them a little video, be like, hey, I'm thinking of you, and this is why I'm so grateful to have you in my life, you know? And I just try to spread that as much as I can.
Wow.